I think the interesting thing we see in our industry is a lot of the, I'll call it the non-wood infrastructure, is getting to an age now where it needs something done. And we're seeing, as you mentioned, utilities really grapple with this concept. It's old, I should replace it, is one kind of way of thinking. Or no, it's still perfectly good or mostly good, and I can make these little tweaks and improvements, and the line is actually will last much longer. Kind of walk me through your view if you're sitting in the shoes of a utility operator. What you believe you would need to be able to make an educated decision regarding those kind of two options, and maybe some of the struggles and some of the things you could find in a company like Exo to help give you the information to make an intelligent decision.
Sure. So as I mentioned before, the age of the infrastructure in general is 40, 50, 60 years old, and yet steel doesn't degrade over time. It can corrode if it's not maintained, and so I believe there's a certain push or tidal push to the industry, or replacement mentality, so that it's kind of like the throwaway mentality, but applied to structures, so that after a certain period of aging, because of that age, there's a belief, I would say, that a structure needs to be replaced, when in actuality, maybe it can be extended for another 60 years. Mm-hmm. I mean, there's no reason why these structures can't be extended indefinitely, given the right maintenance program, given the right proper attention to detail, like a company like Exo. So that type of thinking is everywhere. And of course, engineering, we learn from school, even university days, about build new. Mm-hmm. You learn how to build new. The emphasis is always to build new. Yet we don't really discuss in university the idea of extension, life extension, and what's involved in really assessing a structure for life extension. So our focus is, of course, life extension. And now, if a structure needs to be replaced, okay, if there's so many things that are degraded, it's been neglected over the years, and it's corroding everywhere, well, then at that point, perhaps there's a point of no return. But that point of no return, where you assess the cost of maintaining a structure or bringing it up to the current standard versus outright replacing the line, that difference is a lot different than it used to be. Mm-hmm. The cost of construction, of new construction in the U.S. has skyrocketed just over the last 10 years. Labor costs, construction costs, material costs, all these things, environmental impact, all these things have really increased. And so I think looking at that from that perspective, and looking at the condition of the line and assessing these key areas that only need attention, I think is really key. And of course, it's important that we highlight those areas and communicate those to the utility so that they can understand to make a decision on whether they need to make that full replacement, or mm-hmm. whether they can extend these structures for another year and how they can actually do that.
Absolutely. And all of that cost ultimately rolls down to you and I and every other consumer of electric power, right? When that cost is passed into our rates, and mm-hmm. And we all have to pay for those things. And so certainly at least having the tools and the skills to evaluate your options is really valuable. And we're starting to see, as a business and as an industry, more and more folks saying, wait a second, we don't always have to rebuild new. And I think you're right. Some of that's really being driven by some of these challenges. Right-of-ways are harder and harder to acquire. Environmental impacts, dealing with landowners. I mean, those are all really tough challenges in construction, which is, as you said, driving the cost up, and allows options like ours to extend the life of assets for decades, a really viable option.